It was 8:14 on a Monday morning, and I was standing outside the glass conference room with a stack of printed contracts in my arms when I heard my manager describe my entire job in 4 words. "She's just an assistant." He said it to the client, not to me. I wasn't even in the room yet, technically, still lined up at the door waiting for the signal to bring the documents in. But the door was cracked, and his voice carries, and I heard it land clean and casual, like he was clarifying something mildly confusing, rather than erasing 3 years of my life in a sentence. "Don't worry about looping her into strategy calls," he continued. "She just handles logistics. Scheduling, printing, that kind of thing." I stood there in the hallway holding 43 pages of a contract I had personally drafted, redlined and revised 6 times over the past 2 weeks, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very still. I want you to remember that phrase. Just handles logistics. Because by the end of this story, that phrase is going to mean something very different to everyone in that room. But we're not there yet. Before we get there, you need to understand exactly how small I let myself become, and exactly how long it took me to notice I was doing it. And if stories like this one keep you up at night thinking about your own job, hit subscribe now, because this one gets better every single minute. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever shrunk your title down to make themselves look bigger? My name is Renee. I was 28, and on paper I was an executive assistant at a mid-size commercial real estate firm. That was the title on my badge. It was not, in any honest accounting, the job I actually did. I'd been hired 3 years earlier to support a director named Blake, manage his calendar, coordinate his travel, keep his inbox from drowning him. That's genuinely what the job was. In month 1. By month 6, I was drafting his client proposals because his first drafts were, to put it kindly, disorganized. By year 1, I was building the financial models behind our biggest deals, because Blake understood real estate relationships far better than he understood a spreadsheet, and someone had to reconcile the two. By year 2, I was the person who actually knew where every deal stood at any given moment, which client was nervous, which contract needed a revision, which number in which model was about to become a problem if nobody caught it in time. Blake was good at rooms. He was excellent, genuinely, at charm, the kind of easy warmth that makes clients feel like they're his only priority, even when he has 9 other deals running simultaneously in the background. What he was not good at was detail, and for 3 years, I was the detail, quietly, invisibly, entirely uncredited. I told myself this was just how the job worked. Assistant's support, director's lead. That's the shape of the org chart, and I didn't think there was anything unusual about filling in gaps nobody officially assigned to me. The problem is, filling in gaps for 3 years doesn't just build a skill set, it builds a dependency. And dependencies, when the person creating them refuses to acknowledge them out loud, have a way of curdling into something much uglier the moment anyone else starts asking questions. That Monday morning in the hallway was the first time I really let myself feel how ugly it had already become. The client on the other side of that glass door was called Ashford Group, a name I'm changing here, obviously, but the deal itself was very real to me at the time. It was the largest transaction our firm had touched in 2 years, a multi-property commercial acquisition, worth enough that if it fell through, it wasn't just an embarrassment, it was a number that would show up in board meetings for the rest of the year. I had built the entire financial model behind that deal. Every projection, every risk assessment, every contingency clause in the contract I was holding in the hallway, mine, start to finish, refined over 2 straight weeks of nights, and one very memorable Saturday I'd given up without complaint. Blake's job, in theory, was to walk the client through it, answer questions, close the relationship. My job, in his mind, was to print it, staple it, and stay quiet in the corner in case anyone needed coffee. When I walked in and set the documents down, nobody at that table looked at me twice. I sat in the chair against the wall, not at the table, against the wall, the way you'd seat someone who was expected to take notes and nothing else. And I watched Blake present my work as though he'd built it himself. He got 2 questions into the client's follow-up before I noticed something was wrong. The client's CFO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia, tapped a specific line in the risk assessment section. Walk me through this contingency here. The clause about the environmental remediation timeline. If that slips past 90 days, what's our actual exposure? Blake paused a half-second too long. It was a small pause. Most people in that room probably didn't notice it. I noticed it instantly, because I knew, with total certainty, that Blake had never actually read that section closely enough to answer the question he was being asked. Great question, he said, buying time the way he always did. The short version is, we've built in appropriate buffers across the board. Patricia's expression didn't change, but her pen stopped moving. That's the kind of silence that should scare you in a room like that. And it clearly didn't scare Blake at all, because he had no idea what he'd just failed to answer. I sat against the wall with the actual answer sitting fully formed in my head. I had written that clause myself. I knew the exposure numbers to the decimal, and I said absolutely nothing, because nobody had asked me, and I had spent 3 years training everyone in that building, including myself, to believe that wasn't my role. The meeting ended 20 minutes later on a note of polite, unresolved tension. Patricia's exact words as she stood to leave. We'll need some follow-up before we're ready to move forward. Follow-up on the biggest deal our firm had touched in 2 years, because the person presenting it didn't actually understand the thing he was presenting. I want to pause the story here, because this is the part most people skip past too quickly, and it's the part that actually matters. That night I sat at my kitchen table, still in my work clothes, and I did something I had never once let myself do in 3 years. I made an honest list. On one side, everything Blake was actually credited for. On the other, everything I had actually built. The list on my side went on for 2 full pages. Every major deal in the last 18 months had my financial modeling underneath it. Every client proposal that had actually closed had my language in the sections that mattered. The 3 biggest client relationships in our book of business ran through emails, where I was the one who actually understood the account history well enough to keep them calm during rough patches. Blake just showed up for the handshake at the end. On his side of the list, the handshake at the end, the charm in the room, the title on the org chart. I sat there for a long time looking at those 2 lists, and something in me went from quietly uncomfortable to completely coldly clear. I wasn't angry yet. Anger came later. What I felt first was something closer to grief, the specific, disorienting grief of realizing you built an entire second job inside your actual job, gave it everything you had, and never once asked anyone to acknowledge it existed. I thought about that phrase from the hallway. She just handles logistics. I thought about Patricia's pen, stopping on the table, and I thought, for the first time in 3 years, a very specific thought. What happens to this deal if I simply stop filling in the gaps? I didn't act on it that night. I wasn't ready yet, and honestly, some small, loyal part of me still wanted to believe Blake would find his own way out of the hole he'd just started digging. He didn't. The hole got deeper within 48 hours. Wednesday morning, Blake called me into his office, and for the first time in 3 years, I watched him look genuinely afraid. Patricia's team sent over 11 follow-up questions, he said, sliding a printed email across his desk like it was contaminated. They want detailed answers by Friday, or they're pulling out of exclusivity. 11 questions. I read through them in under a minute, and every single one was something I could answer immediately, because I had built the underlying model myself. I need you to help me put together answers, Blake said. Not, we need to work on this together. Not, thank you for building this in the first place. Just, help me. Of course, I said, because 3 years of habit doesn't disappear in 48 hours, no matter how clear your kitchen table list was the night before. I drafted every single answer. I wrote out the full remediation timeline exposure Patricia had asked about in the meeting, the exact number Blake hadn't been able to produce on the spot. I built a supplementary risk matrix nobody had asked for, because I knew from experience with this exact type of client that it would preempt at least 3 more rounds of questions before they even arrived. I handed the document to Blake Thursday evening. He barely skimmed it before sending it to Patricia's team under his own name, with a note that read, "In full. Here's the additional detail you requested. Happy to discuss further." You requested. Not. My team put together. Not. My analyst built this. Just a clean, simple erasure, the same one I'd been living inside for 3 years, except this time, I had a 2-page handwritten list at home proving exactly how much that erasure was worth. Friday morning, Patricia's team responded with cautious approval and one final ask, a video call the following Monday with, in her words, "Whoever actually built this risk model, we want to speak directly with the analyst on the deal." Blake read that line out loud to me, and for just a second, something flickered across his face that looked almost like recognition. Almost like he understood, briefly, that the wall he'd built between me and the client's awareness of me was about to have a very specific, very unavoidable hole punched straight through it. "I'll loop you in," he said, like he was doing me a favor. "Just keep it brief. Answer what they ask, nothing more. I'll lead." I said okay, and then I went home and opened that 2-page list again, and I made a decision that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with simply refusing to shrink myself back down to fit inside a sentence one more time. Monday's call started exactly the way Blake wanted it to. He opened with warm small talk, thanked Patricia's team for their patience, and introduced me in a single, breathtakingly small sentence. "And this is Renee, who helped pull some of the numbers together." 3 years of work, one deal that had nearly collapsed under his own gaps, reduced to helping pull some numbers together, live, in front of the exact client whose confidence in this firm was hanging by a thread. Patricia looked directly at me through the screen. "Renee, walk us through the remediation exposure model. Specifically, I want to understand your assumptions on the 90-day threshold, because that's the piece that gave us pause originally." I felt Blake go very still beside me. I felt him realize, in real time, that he had just handed the floor to the one person in that meeting who actually knew every answer cold, because he had no other choice. He genuinely couldn't answer it himself, and both of us knew it. I could have kept it brief, the way he'd asked. 3 years of training told me to. I didn't. I walked Patricia's team through the full model, not just the number, but the reasoning behind it, the comparable deals I'd pulled the assumption from, the specific clause language I'd written to protect the firm if the timeline slipped. I answered every follow-up question with the same calm precision I'd used building the model at midnight 2 weeks earlier, because I actually understood every piece of it, in a way that had never once been in question, except in the minds of the people sitting closest to me. Patricia's expression shifted about 4 minutes in, not dramatically, just a small, visible recalibration, the look of someone updating a mental model of who's actually in the room. "This is exactly the level of detail we needed," she said finally. "Renee, I have to say, this is some of the clearest risk modeling I've seen from a firm your size. Whoever built this really understands the exposure." "I built it," I said. Simply, not defensively, just true. There was a small silence on the call. Blake's small-talk voice, when he finally spoke again, had lost about half its usual warmth. "Renee's been an incredible asset to the team," he said, recovering fast, trying to fold my answer back into his narrative. Patricia didn't let it fold quite the way he wanted. "I'd like Renee on all future calls for this deal," she said plainly, to both of us. "Direct line, not routed through you. No offense, Blake. I just want the person who actually understands the model in the room going forward." No offense, Blake. Except it was exactly the kind of offense that changes the entire shape of a professional relationship in one sentence. Live, in front of both of us, delivered by the client whose approval he needed most. The meeting ended cordially. Patricia's team confirmed they were moving forward with the deal. The biggest transaction our firm had touched in 2 years, saved, in the most literal sense, by the exact person who'd been sitting against the wall a week earlier because nobody thought she belonged at the table. Blake didn't say anything to me for almost an hour after the call ended. When he finally did, it wasn't gratitude. You could have kept it shorter, he said, standing in my doorway, arms crossed. I said I'd lead. You asked me to answer their questions, I said. I answered their questions. You made it look like I don't know my own deal. You don't, I said, quietly, not cruelly, just true, the way it had been true for 3 years, the way I'd finally stopped pretending it wasn't. I built the model, Blake. I have for a long time. Today was the first time anyone outside this office actually found out. He didn't have an answer for that. He walked away instead, the same way people in this genre always do the moment the truth stops being deniable. Word moved through the office fast, not because I told anyone, but because Patricia had CC'd our firm's managing partner on her follow-up email, the one that read, in full, "Please ensure Renee remains the primary technical contact for this deal going forward. Her modeling work has been the clearest part of this entire process." The managing partner, a woman named Carol who I'd exchanged maybe a dozen sentences with in 3 years, called me into her office the next morning. "I want to understand something," she said, sliding that email across her desk. "How long have you actually been building the financial models on Blake's deals?" "Since about month 6, I said. "So roughly 2.5 years. She was quiet for a moment, doing some visible internal math about what that meant. Not just for this deal, but for every deal that had come before it, every model that had actually been built by an assistant, while a director's name sat on top of it. "That's not an assistant's job," she said finally. "That's an analyst's job. A senior one, based on what I just read." "I know," I said. And for the first time in 3 years, I let myself say the next part out loud, calmly, without apologizing for it. "I've known for a while. I just never had a reason to say it until today. Here's the part I want you to really pay attention to, because this is the part that separates a satisfying story from an actual life change. I didn't ask for revenge against Blake. I didn't go looking for a way to get him fired or humiliated beyond what his own gaps had already done to him in that room. That was never the point, and chasing that would have cost me more than it gave me. What I asked Carol for was much simpler, and much harder to say out loud after 3 years of silence. A title that matched the work. A formal analyst role, reporting directly on deals like this one instead of through Blake, with the compensation that should have existed the entire time I'd been quietly doing the job under someone else's name. Carol didn't hesitate. "Given what Patricia's team just told us in writing, I don't think that's a big ask. I think it's overdue." 2 weeks later, I had a new title. Senior Financial Analyst, Commercial Transactions. Blake and I still worked in the same building. We were, on paper, no longer in a reporting relationship where my work quietly became his credit. He never apologized, not really, just a stiff, clipped acknowledgement weeks later that things have changed a bit with the reporting structure, said the way you'd describe weather rather than an actual reckoning. I didn't need his apology by that point. I'd stopped needing his validation the moment I said I built it out loud on that call and heard how simple and true it sounded. Here's what I actually want you to take from this, more than the satisfying part where the client cut Blake out of the loop in real time. I spent 3 years being genuinely excellent at a job that wasn't the job on my badge, and I let the mismatch between the two stand because correcting it felt, somehow, like making a fuss. Like drawing attention to myself in a way that didn't match the quiet, reliable person I'd always been. Nobody forced that silence on me every single day. I renewed it myself, morning after morning, because it felt safer than the alternative, safer than sitting at the table instead of against the wall, safer than saying, out loud, in a room full of people, "Actually, that's my work." The client didn't rescue me because they were kind. They rescued the situation because they needed an accurate answer, and were willing to go around whoever couldn't provide it. That's it. That's the entire mechanism. Competence, once it's finally visible, doesn't need to ask permission to be respected. It just needs one moment where hiding it costs more than revealing it. If you're sitting in a meeting right now, against the wall instead of at the table, doing the actual work behind someone else's name, I'm not telling you to wait for a crisis to force the truth out into the open the way mine did. I'm telling you, the truth was always going to come out eventually, one way or another. The only real choice you have is whether you're the one who says it first, calmly, on your own terms, or whether you wait for a room full of strangers to say it for you. I waited 3 years. I don't recommend the wait. I recommend the sentence. I built it. 2 words shorter than that, if you need them even simpler. That's mine. Has this happened to you, doing the real work while someone else got the title? Tell me exactly what they said when they minimized you. I read every single comment, and I promise you, this room is full of people who've sat against that same wall. If this story hit home, hit subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from, and the next one might be the story that's actually yours.